Chapter 1. If ever there was an evening for stories no sane person could make up, then this was it. Maggie Dolan shooed the stragglers from the Lakes End coffee shop, so skillfully they didn't realize they were being shooed, and turned the sign from "Come right on in" to "Back at 6 a.m." She took a peek outside. The wind had gathered confidence as well as speed on its sweep across Lake Michigan and into Chicago. It was almost nightfall. Swirling litter and the first golden leaves of the year flashed like fireflies as they caught car headlights. She folded her arms and hugged herself. If only the custom was as lively as the weather. She stepped back and pushed the door to. A foot appeared, as if the wind had dropped it there, and lodged in the doorway.
"I'm sorry, we're just closing."
She looked up at the man. Fear was etched on his face just as surely as buttermilk cheesecake was chalked onto the specials board.
I said, "We're closed."
"Don't you remember me?"
The man said.
"Sure, you've been in here a few times over summer, usually with a girl in tow."
She shrugged.
"We're still closed."
I really need to talk to somebody.
The man's face had looked young and firm when he'd been in before, when he'd smiled and talked and smiled his way into those girls' affections. But now he didn't seem quite so handsome, with the odd grays on his greasy, pockmarked skin. His coat was filthy and his hair was matted and set at an odd angle on one side. He had a faint, gassy smell to him, like he'd just worked a shift as a garage mechanic.
"So go to a bar if you need to talk,"
Maggie said.
"I gotta close up and get home. I cook for half of Chicago during the day, but I got kids to cook for at home."
I'll pay you.
The man said.
I don't care how much.
"Geez, you must be desperate."
She looked again. Something or somebody had knocked that cocky smile off his face and buried it. Perhaps that was what made him look older. He really did seem to have aged years in the few weeks since he'd last visited the coffee shop. Between the flaps of his coat, his chest was sunken, like one of the old boys who'd given up on life and spent their nights under the railroad arches.
You're the only person I can trust,
He said.
Please.
Maggie's eyes fell on his filthy jeans and mud-splattered sneakers. This was a far cry from the casual but neat clothes he wore before. She let out a spluttering sigh, and half of her mouth smiled.
"Ah, what the hell? Call it loyalty. Come on in."
She stood aside, and the man shuffled along to the furthest table from the street, the one that threw precious little light on his face. He eased himself into the seat with the careful precision of an arrow being placed in a crossbow.
"So what's it to be?"
Maggie said.
What?
The man's face, framed by that dank strawberry blonde hair, looked up to her like he was pleading. She stood by the counter, casting a hand to the wares.
"You look like you need a strong coffee."
No,
He said.
just sit.
Just sit.
He pulled out a wallet and emptied it, putting $15 $20 bills onto the table.
Sit and listen. I need somebody to know, and I feel I can trust you.
Maggie glanced at the money.
"Hell, it's a long time since anybody trusted me that much."
She pulled a chair out from the table, turned it around so the back faced him, and sat astride it.
"Look, mister, forget the money, really. I'm as short as anyone else, but I'm no hooker."
She plucked a wad of gum from the corner of her mouth and pressed it onto a plate. In truth, Maggie felt a little flattered. She was fully aware her appearance clashed with her brash manner, just as much as it did with her bright orange apron. Her hair was as mousy and nondescript as it always had been, and what little makeup she had on had been smudged by a heavy day of steam and sweat.
"Besides,"
She said.
"I like a good story more than you might think."
The man stared at her for a moment. His eyes like holes melted in midnight snow.
"I'm listening."
Maggie said.
Go ahead.
The man took a deep and labored breath, resulting in a guttural cough, then gave his brow a wipe with his sleeve and leaned forward.
I'm going to tell you a story,
He said.
a story about a man who used to call himself Patrick Leary.